Now, one thing I have not emphasized yet is the importance of indentation in Python. So far, you would have seen that when we place a colon at the end of our if statements, the next body of code is indented by a few spaces. And this is done automatically by Jupyter Notebook, as well as other IDEs that you may use. Now, leading whitespace, which can be formed of both spaces and tabs, before any statement is referred to as indentation. So why does Python do this, and why does it need it? Well, in Python, the indentation is an essential and mandatory feature that must be followed while writing code. Otherwise, the Python interpreter will just throw an indentation error. This is different to other languages such as C++, C, and Java, which use indentation for readability purposes. Now, the indentation in Python actually serves a purpose other than code readability. Statements with the same amount of indentation, i.e. statements with the same number of white spaces before them, are treated in Python as a single block of code. So a block in Python is a group of statements with the same indentation level, i.e. the same amount of leading white spaces. So let's see what errors we could run into if we don't use indentation properly. So if I put a simple if statement that states if 1 is greater than 0, then a colon, seeing as this is true, the body of this code block will run. Now you'll notice that when I press return, our code block starts with leading whitespace. So if I simply print the string yes it is, but rather than leaving this whitespace here, I remove the whitespace so it's on the same level as the if statement, you can see that when I run this code, we run into an indentation error, and the Python interpreter is telling us that it's expecting an indented block. Now, it's best practice to use 4 white spaces for indentation. So if I press the spacebar 4 times, you can see that we now have the print statement indented. When I now run this code cell, we print yes, it is. Now, I could have also indented this code cell by 2 spaces, but you'll see that Jupyter Notebook actually puts the word print in red, warning us that there is something wrong with this code line. Now, if I were to run this cell, it's still going to print yes it is because it's not enforced by the Python interpreter, but best practice states that we should utilize 4 spaces, so indenting this by an extra 2 is the convention we should stick to. Now let's suppose we execute 2 print statements in our code block. So if I put if 1 is greater than 0, then a colon, I can print the string 1 is greater than 0. I could then print a second line stating, I promise. Now when I run this code cell, we do indeed print the 2 statements accordingly, but if I were to indent the first line by 4 spaces and the second line by 2, despite both of these print statements being indented, we still run into an indentation error, and the indentation error states, unindent does not match any outer indentation level. And that's because this code cell simply has one if statement and it's expected to only contain 1 block of code. With 2 print statements on different levels, the interpreter actually thinks there are 3 blocks of code within this cell. However, we know there are only 2. We have an if statement, and the if statement contains 1 code body. So to correct this, we need to make sure that the indentation is at the same level. Now, after this if statement has evaluated the true and then prints out the 2 sentences accordingly, we could, outside of this if statement, i.e. at the same level as the if statement, print the string finished. When I run this code cell, we wouldn't run into any error. We first of all execute the if statement. It evaluates to true, so the code body is then executed. Once the if statement has been executed, the Python interpreter will then simply run the next line of code that it sees, and it then sees it needs to print the word finished. The if 1 is greater than 0 and the print finish line are at the same level of indentation, the code body of the if statement is indented by 1 space. We'll shortly see how we can create nested if statements, which will mean that we have more indentation the more conditional statements we include. So let's recap quickly on the key takeaways for indentation. Python's default indentation is 4 spaces. The amount of space is entirely up to the user, however a minimum of 1 space is required to indent a statement, but it's best practice to utilise 4 spaces, as I'm sure the Python community would agree. In order to define blocks of statements in Python, indentation is required. In a code block, the number of spaces must be equal, like we saw in that prior example. White spaces are actually preferred over tabs for indentation, so pressing the spacebar is better than pressing the tab key, and the indentation should also be done with either white space or tabs. Combining tabs and white spaces together when creating indentation might result in incorrect indentation issues. So keep this in mind when using indentation. In the next video, we'll see how the elif and else statements can be used in control flow. So I'll see you in the next video.